everybody. Welcome to the Austin user group session with Bill Fetter for Unfettered Marketing. Bill's a longtime Pardot user. I remember him from the B2B community for many, many years. Just has a wealth of experience to share with us, and I'm really happy he's here to talk to us about the cool Handlebar merge language tricks. If you saw his session at Pardot in December, some of this is familiar, but also definitely feel free to ask questions in chat. And we'll have some time for questions at the end, I think. And if you have questions that are not HML tricks, Bill's also really, really knowledgeable. So we can probably get him to answer those too.
I think we should probably have a dueling Pardot knowledge session, Laura. You are one of the foremost experts yourself. So.
All right. But yeah, so Bill, go ahead, and I will put myself on mute.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I see people still arriving. The thing about Pardot was that the sessions were very, very short. So I have taken advantage of the fact that this is a bit longer. I've expanded some things, and full disclosure, I was still working on these slides as of 10 minutes ago. So there may be a hiccup or two as we go along, but please feel free to put questions in the chat as you wish, and I will attempt to notice them as we go along and address them as we go. And I heard this meeting was this Austin user group was BYOB, which I thought was bring your own barbecue. So I thought I'd just put a pan at that. That was Tuesday night. I have a friend who does this. Well, not professionally, but he's got a big following, and it's finally gotten warm enough here to get the smoker out from under the snowdrift. So he's started the season, and it's awesome. All right, let's talk about what the session outline is. What's Handlebar merge? Why use it? How to enable it? The basic fields and the patterns, and then 5 cool tricks and riffs. And a lot of variations on those tricks and riffs, including some new ones that we didn't talk about in Pardot. And I keep finding new stuff, so this is going to be fun. Okay, so what is Handlebar merge? It replaces the % merge field format in Pardot. It must be enabled in your Pardot account. If it's older and it's not already been done, it will. If you have a brand new account, it's already been enabled, but a lot of people have accounts that are legacy, and you've been getting one of Pardot's famous green button nag messages, probably asking you to enable it. And as Laura said, there's really no reason why you shouldn't. There's not really any downside to enabling it, and there's a lot of upside. Now, back at Pardot, I asked the question on the poll from the people who were in attendance, and at that moment there were 125 people in the room. I'd asked if you'd enabled it in their org yet, and I was a bit surprised to find that almost a third of them had not. Now this was a few months ago, so maybe we've gotten the word out and people have enabled it at this point. But I still regularly come across people who have not enabled this. The reason, of course, we want to use merge language is we want to be able to customize things. This is one of the examples of the downsides of customization, which is getting things like null and not provided in your merge fields. Handlebar merge is a great reminder that null should be blank. Always. Don't ever put placeholder information in fields that ought to be null, because then you run the risk of having stuff like this happen. This is an actual email that one of my clients got from her rep over at QuickBooks. And her real name is Anna, not provided. So that's the reason we use merge fields. We want to be able to customize things, and Handlebar merge gives us the opportunity to make things much more customized than before. And the reason, as I said, that we never want to put placeholder information into a field that ought to be blank is Handlebar merge logic requires that the field either be populated or blank. So you get a really nice form of basic dynamic content in Handlebar Merge, even for Pardot licenses that don't have the dynamic content available. And it's a form of dynamic content you can use in combination with other dynamic content, which is kind of neat. But it all is predicated on this idea of the field has something in it versus the field has nothing in it. So it's just a switch. The dynamic content for Handlebar Merge, it's something or nothing. And sure, you can say, recipient first name not provided, but really Handlebar Merge is much more than that. So when you push that famous green button that says this cannot be reversed to upgrade to Handlebar Merge, what happens? Well, the first thing that happens is you get a whole new language when you press the merge field button in your merge field email builder button, and it's changed all the field names from an old formatting to sort of this new, much more Salesforce type of formatting, where you have recipient.account.name, for example. Now, I went through and lined up all of these side by side to see what was different. For the most part, other than naming conventions, it's generally the same. You get there's a few quirky little new things here. Address 1 and address 2 are now combined. You get these new fields called current day, current month, and current year, but they are numbers apparently, which a lot of people are already saying, how come it can't be a word? It can't be the word February or the word March. So, there's always these new feature growing pains, right? The account description is gone. And this is an update to what I had said earlier. The HTML signature and the text signature are now actually combined. There's just one signature field. But if you're using it in the HTML version of an email, it pulls the HTML signature from the Pardot user record. And if you pull, if it's the text version, it pulls the text version of the signature from the Pardot user record. Now, bear in mind, there's very little that's left in the Pardot user record that you can actually customize. These two things are among them. But there's actually really 3 things you can customize in the Pardot user record now. One is this URL field. And then the other two things are the HTML signature and the text signature. I did some testing the other day. You cannot use Handlebar Merge in the URL field, and you cannot use it in the text field, but you can use it because it gives you the option. You can use it in the HTML signature field. So you can use Handlebar Merge language information right in the HTML signature field, which opens up some interesting possibilities. If you're using that HTML signature on the basis of, for example, whether they're a customer or not, or whether you're sending as the assigned user. All right. Handlebar Merge gives you more dynamic customization than a lot of other formats. You can put 200 Handlebar Merge fields in a single piece of email. In addition to the 10 pieces of dynamic content that are allowed. So there's a whole lot of customization that's available. And the main thing when you do that upgrade is you can continue to use the old merge language. It will work in existing email templates that are already in your org. So everything that was already there, it's still going to work. You're not going to break any of your templates. And this is why I say there's really no downside to you turning it on. Everything that was there before and worked before will continue to work. If you open an old template, however, it's going to upgrade automatically the merge fields that are in that template to Handlebar Merge. So it will automatically update the template. Even if you just update the template and save it again, it's going to update the merge fields in the template. But the old ones will continue to work as before. It's just that moving forward, the only thing you'll be able to really select is the new merge tags. And if you open an old template, it will upgrade it to the new format. So when you look at a list of email templates, there'll be a little checkbox in the list view that shows you whether or not that template has been updated or not to HML. So we talked a little bit already about the simple logic of if-else. If something, show this, else if there's nothing in that field, show that. The basic format is this pound if, this merge field, some statement if that merge field has data in it, else some other statement if the merge field is blank, forward stroke if to close the statement. The main thing here to bear in mind is you don't have to put anything in the else area. You can leave it empty. So you can use this as a way to show something only if there's a value in the field that you're using as the logic. You also don't have to use whatever that logic field is in the statement you're showing. So you can if you want to, but you don't have to. So you can use that merge field can be anything you want in order to make the value show up. But you don't have to use that field itself. So that's another nice thing. You can use it, but you don't have to. So you can put anything you want, and you can even, of course, mix. You can mix additional merge fields into that statement that you're showing if the merge field has data. What kinds of fields can you use? So this goes down to the question of what kinds of fields can you use and should you use in this scenario? Pardot's going to create custom handlebar merge fields for all of your custom fields, but that doesn't mean you should use them for this kind of logic presentation. And one of the reasons is, for example, some of you are aware that checkboxes in Salesforce and checkboxes in Pardot have sort of differing behaviors. And a checkbox in Salesforce is more like a radio button in Pardot, but trying to get them to show null values is hard. Once a checkbox becomes populated in Salesforce, it tends to want to tell Pardot that the null value is false. So it's kind of hard to get a synchronized checkbox in Salesforce to work with this, because it's going to tell Pardot, hey, if there's nothing in the value, then it's false. And that's what Pardot says the value is. So it's tricky, let's just say, using checkboxes and radio buttons to make this thing populate. Text works great, numbers work great, drop-downs are fine. Displaying multiple responses, obviously, yeah, it works, but clearing multiple responses, if you wanted to go back to, if you want to be able to switch the thing back and forth between null and not null, is a little tricky. Also beware if you have default field values. If you have default field values in any of your fields, then you will never get the else logic to show up on a handlebar merge logic presentation, because it's got a default value, so it'll never be blank, it'll never be false. So tend towards using the stuff on the left side of the column. Be careful with the stuff on the right. You can use it. Probably you don't want to use it if it's synced to Salesforce, but that's another thing about custom fields in Pardot. You can have as many as you want, and they don't all have to be mapped to Salesforce. Oh. Okay, does it work in Classic and Lightning? Yes, it does. We talked about this, so you can show multiple merge fields inside of the condition. So anything you want, you can build up a whole bunch of content. In fact, it doesn't have to be short. It can have pictures in it. It can have links in it. It can have formatting in it. It doesn't really matter. It's just whatever you're encapsulating between the if and the else and the close if, formatted in any way you want. There's also some syntax that allows you to put in comments in your formatting that won't show up as well. Pardot Salesforce has some nice examples in their documentation on that. So here's an example of why you'd show multiple merge fields or why you'd show something else. So if you're sending on the basis of the recipient account, for example, and you want to show who your sales rep is for that account, then you could, if that account has a number, you show the sales rep's information. Or if they don't have an account, so this would be, let's say I'm sending an email that might go out to it might go out to a prospect, it might go out to a lead, it might go out to a contact. In this particular instance, it's looking to see if the recipient has an account associated with them. So if they're a lead, they won't have an account. If they're a prospect, they won't have an account. So if either of those conditions are true, then they're not probably a customer, or at least they're not a contact. So instead of showing who your sales rep is, we ask, would you like to schedule a call, a discovery call, a demo, whatever. So this gives you the ability to sort of flip between, am I prospecting here to someone who already exists in my system versus somebody who may be newer and I want to have a different kind of an engagement with them. All right, so trick number 1 is the resubscribe when using form handlers and operational emails. So this was another question I asked, who enabled prospect to resubscribe. A lot of people had not enabled this yet. And one of the reasons I think that people believe that they can't use it is because they don't use Pardot forms on their site. They use form handlers. And the resubscribe is nice. Well, I'll show you where to enable it first. So we just, because it's funny because it's kind of hidden. And I'm going to do, let's see, I'm going to drag this over here. So inside your Pardot settings, you hit the edit here, and then you can see resubscribe down here. And that's where you would enable it. It requires you to choose a email template, and there is a pre-built one already in the system that you can work off of, and then a resubscribe prompt, and then the confirmation text. So you need to have a resubscribe template, email template available, because this thing works actually off of email. But it's a little, like I said, it's a little funny to find it in here because you don't see it when this is closed. So it's kind of hidden in that sense. So that's where to enable it. You have to have the resubscribe email template, even if you're not intending to really use it. You have to have it because it has to be able to send the method by which the resubscribe works is it sends you an email, and then you have to click the button to resubscribe. So how does it work if you are using a Pardot form? If you have a Pardot form on your website, and you might already be cookied and it would automatically pop up this message, but even if you're not, as soon as you put in an email address that is unsubscribed, it will pop up this little message in the template, and it gives you this information that you had the ability to set forward in the place that we just looked at in the setup. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's any way you can force this to be multi-language yet. So we're dealing strictly with English here. One resubscribe template. Kind of a bummer for those of you that are doing enterprise level stuff and would like to have a way to do this in multiple languages. This just doesn't seem to work. There also is an option on the form to change what this message is form by form. So that is also an advanced option now that's available to you. But that's what shows up when it's a Pardot form. But when it's not a Pardot form, when you have a form handler, of course, this doesn't work because it's not Pardot's form. So it doesn't know that you're unsubscribed. So here's the workaround. So the first thing we need to do is create a way for us to identify people who've opted out of our emails, because you can't actually address opted out as a field inside of Handlebar merge. So we have to create, if the prospect email status is opted out, then we create a custom field called is opted out and say that it's opted out. And that's a way to flag a custom field that says the person is opted out. So here's the recipe when they've been opted out, and this you can send in a auto reply, which is obviously the auto replies work even if somebody's opted out already. So you can drop this into your auto reply. You could even drop it into your auto reply on the basis of dynamic content if you wanted. But this simple little thing, if the recipient opted out, whatever your switch field name is, yes, you've opted out, click here to resubscribe. And if it's blank, they haven't opted out, don't show anything. So this message only would show up in the autoresponder if they've opted out. And then, of course, you get an autoresponder if you do anything in Pardot, but it only works, of course, in an autoresponder. It would work also in an operational email if you're essentially bypassing the opted out status for some reason. But it will not work, of course, in Engagement Studio because that does respect the opted out switch regardless. So if you don't want to use the full resubscribe link, just create it as part of the link. It's actually a selectable link type in your email builder. So you can actually just select it as a link type to click here to resubscribe. So here's the other tip about this, and it's okay. That's great; they can resubscribe, but Pardot does not want to give up data. Pardot is, as my friend Mike Cruiser always says, Pardot's a great accumulator of data. It doesn't like to give it up. So we have to create a way, if somebody does click the resubscribe, to make sure that field gets cleared so that we don't show this message to them again and confuse them. So essentially, we have to create a method then that if they do opt back in, we're going to clear that opted out custom field. And the recommendation here would be if their prospect status becomes not opted out and the prospect custom field is still yes, then to clear it, but also only do this, say, if the last activity is days ago is less than 1, so that this thing isn't running constantly, because you kind of have to put this on a repeat, but you don't want it running against your whole database every day. So do this if they've had recent activity, and that will keep it from being one of these automation rules that constantly runs. So that's the way to clear that field, so that the next time they submit something and you've got that message on your auto reply, that it doesn't show that. So trick number 2 is showing HTML links or don't show them. But I do want to go off on a rabbit trail here based on the new 2-click unsubscribe before we do that. The 2-click unsubscribe is now available. So we used to say, especially because of the bot anti-spam stuff that tends to go through and click all the emails and messages. If you deal with enterprise clients, you sometimes see this. It goes through and checks all the links in the messages to see if they're bad or not. But what it ends up doing, if you have that old 1-click unsubscribe, is it clicks the unsubscribe button and your people get unsubscribed and they didn't even know they did. So there is, in your unsubscribe page, there is now this 2-click unsubscribe enabled checkbox. And this is using the same unsubscribe template that you normally would use. It's just adding essentially another page to it. So what's What's kind of a bummer here is that you can't use HML in this message. This title text is what shows up in the title section of your layout. If your unsubscribe page layout has a title section in it, the default text, "Are you sure you want to unsubscribe?" cannot be changed. Once again, something that doesn't work if you do multiple languages. But now at least you can create this custom message here, which is optional. But one suggestion I would have is, even though you can't use HML in here, you can put a link in. So I would recommend, if you're trying to use this, to put a link to your preference center in this message, so that you give people the opportunity to say, well, maybe I would like to get, just unsubscribe from certain things and not everything. So it is a way to try and keep them from unsubscribing entirely. So that is the first bit, and the second bit is, again, the confirmation page. No HML allowed anywhere. Title the message, which is shows up in the content section of the layout. Optional. The default text, again, cannot be changed. So that is the new two-click unsubscribe. Totally recommend it. If that's not reason enough to go in and upgrade all of your templates so that you can take out the unsubscribe link, or actually, you don't even need to take out the unsubscribe link. If you have the old stuff, this is a great way to upgrade it without changing anything. Just go in and enable two-click unsubscribe. And if you have the unsubscribe lurking in your templates anywhere, it's now not subject to those problems of the bots clicking them and unsubscribing your prospects. All right, so back to this, showing a link or not showing a link. So you can use a full URL as a product name in an ownership field. So maybe you have a variety of different products and you want to create a custom field that says whether or not that person owns the product. You could use a full URL in that field as the switch for your dynamic HTML content. You could use that full URL if you wanted to say, give them a link to their product manual or a specific page for support about that product or something like this. And it makes it much more customized. If you know they own the product, you can give them a link to that product information. And this particular example shows if the product exists in that custom field, then it'll show them this link. And if they don't, it shows them nothing. Note on the handlebar merge, if you use the triple brackets, that means to display the raw content. So URLs and other types of information that you might display this way, you might want to experiment with that triple bracket depending on how it's rendering it. So just bear that in mind. That's a Salesforce standard, but it works here as well. Tip 2, we talked about this also. Else can be blank. That was another example of the else is blank. If you want to create use that recipient product 1 as the full link and just use it in your email builder, you can do that. Just create the name as a link and use the link type as URL. If you use the protocol other for this, then it will render the full. So James has asked, what's the opposite of the raw content? This is where you get things rendering funny if it's re-rendering it as if it's re-rendering it a URL as a full URL, because there's certain characters in a URL that aren't allowed in the URL. So you got to be, apparently it also works if you want to actually display code of some kind. If you wanted to show somebody code, that's one of its uses in Salesforce. Again, it's one of these things when you start playing around with this stuff, it is a trick to know if your URL isn't rendering properly. You can try the triple brackets. So if you use the protocol of other to render this link, then you get a, I think this is the one for the non-tracked version. Yeah. So you can render the full link, or you cannot render the full link, and you can get a non-tracked version if you just render this protocol as other and put in the full URL. So there might be a reason why you don't want to track somebody clicking on the link, because it's something you don't care about tracking. So you can get a non-trackable version of your link by using this protocol other versus using the HTTPS to get a trackable version. In that case, the URL would be, the URL that you're using in this field would be minus the protocol HTTPS, so that you let Pardot say this is a regular URL. So that's the way that you get the difference between a tracked URL and a non-tracked URL in a actual rendered link. Trick 3, using HML to show alternative custom redirects. So I love custom redirects as an option for getting some kind of logic into getting some kind of conditional completion logic into an email. So this doesn't even require HML. You can simply put in 2 different links that ask 2 questions and invite people to click on one or the other, and use the completion action on the custom redirect to set something on the basis of what that click was. So, you could add them to a list, you could tag them, you could cause something else to happen. So I love using custom redirects as a way to build some logic into an email without forcing people to go to somewhere and fill out another form. So, and that's what a lot of we're going to talk about from here on out, is ways to improve the user experience without forcing your prospects to fill out more forms. So so here the idea is you could have click a custom redirect if a condition is true, and that custom redirect is going to have some action. If it's false, you show a different custom redirect. That custom redirect might have a different action if it was clicked. But of course, as I said, you don't need to use this. You don't need to use this method just in the context of this. You can use different custom redirects in the same email anyway. And here's a great example of that. You can build entirely in Pardot and NPS, in Pardot and Salesforce. Let me caveat that for a moment. You can build entirely in Pardot and Salesforce an NPS survey solution with just a handful of custom fields, 11 custom redirects, and a couple of custom reports and a dashboard. So I'm going to show you. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to kind of show you how it works here. But the idea here, in terms of showing or not showing, would be the custom redirect, the custom field here is looking if they have an NPS score yet. Like, do they have an NPS rating? If they do, show them a message that says, you rated us this score last time. Would you like to change your rating? Click here. You could go to a landing page that has the NPS survey on it. Or if they don't have a score at all, you can ask would you recommend us to a friend or colleague, the classic NPS question. Now, each one of these numbers in a circle is a custom redirect. So every single one of these is going to a different custom redirect, and the action of the custom redirect is set the NPS score to 3, or set it to 7, or set it to 10. So if they click that custom redirect, they get that score set, and the destination of the custom redirect is a landing page with all you have to have for NPS is the comments, but of course, Pardot, you have to have the email address. So it'll pre-fill that email address for you in the landing page, and you ask them why did you answer the way you answered question for the NPS score. So NPS is a 2-question survey. What's the rating? Why did you say that? And you can do it entirely with Pardot and a couple landing pages, some custom redirects, and then you can sync that NPS score over to Salesforce. And I'm going to show you here what the report might look like. So what you end up doing here is you have several scores here that are calculated based on whether they're a promoter, a passive, or a detractor, and it's a way that you look at NPS. It's the score designates whether they're a promoter, a passive, or a detractor, and a summary that gives you the calculation of the NPS. So this report sets up what the actual NPS score is based on the running total of answers. It also includes the comments in here, so you can see the comments, and then you can build a dashboard that just gives you a calculation, essentially two metrics on the basis of that report. This is the actually calculated NPS score, which is a value from -100 to +100, and this is the distribution of the individual scores that we've collected. So it's quite simple. It really only requires a few custom fields in Salesforce that are calculated, one calculated field in a report. And it's really not that hard to create altogether. I put together this example in a couple of hours. It's really not that hard. But it is a nice way to get that without having to go out and buy another solution for collecting that survey question. So you can use custom redirects if you have the basic Pardot account and you want to use custom redirects to show dynamic something that you might otherwise show in dynamic content. Again, if they're in industry 1, 2, 3, or 4, show them a specific link or show them a specific piece of content. Assuming that your people don't occupy more than one industry, or maybe if they do occupy more than one industry, that's fine. You want to show them both things. And then the very last one is basically the last one if the industry 4 is blank, then show this industry unknown link potentially. So there's different options that you can use here to show different things based on whether or not those fields are populated. And these are some ideas that you could employ. Trick 4, and this starts getting into our really, really interesting stuff, using HML to populate a custom URL. This capability's been in Pardot all along, but HML with the ability to do the logic and so forth to expose these or not expose them makes it even more useful. So expanding the example we had earlier with you're a customer or you're not a customer. In this case, they're not a customer, so I've got the schedule a call with me, click here button. The idea there is that goes to if I have an external scheduling software, it goes to let's say I use Calendly. It will you construct this link to pre-populate the calendar invite. So I know Calendly works like this. I've done this several times. It works beautifully. So in this case, I've actually got a dynamic. I've got a dynamic substitution for the Calendly URL itself. The recipient owner name in this case is a custom actually a custom field, or if depending on how your URL is set up, for instance, if it's just that part of the URL is just the person's first name, last name, you could even use first name, last name HML fields as the substitution there. But usually this Calendly goes Calendly and then the name of the person, stroke, the meeting type, and then you can use the HML to populate the name and the email address. The standard is it's got this name with no first name, last name. That's kind of the Calendly standard. Now there are other field names available: first name, last name, guest location. Depending on how you set up your field, this is the standard one. But here I've actually taken the HML for the recipient first name and the recipient last name and stuck this %20 in between, which is going to render a space. So what that does then when you land on the Calendly page is it puts in first name, last name, and email. Now that that renders, even though the first page of Calendly is not that form. It's actually where you're picking your time. So you pick the time, you confirm the time, and the next page is the form. But Calendly is auto-populating that from the landing page all the way through to the form itself. It pre-fills it, so the friction is almost non-existent. All they have to do is pick their time. They come to the form and they found it's already filled in for them. They just hit enter and they're done. So this works very nice, and I'm sure there are other scheduling softwares out there that will do similar things. But it doesn't have to be scheduling. It could be anything that allows you to send pre-filled values to the landing page. So here's another example of pre-populating a customer URL, but only if the prospect is a customer. This was one of my clients. They had a custom system where it had the recipient's customer ID as part of the link, so that we pre-filled this into the URL from their prospect field. If they didn't have one of these, they're obviously not a customer, so we showed them something else. So this way, part of this URL was constructed by use of the handlebar merge value, which only existed if that was a customer. And then in that particular case, it also pre-filled their email for the sign-in box as well. So it was, again, a low friction way to get people to use that custom link and go to this place for them to log in and do something. I don't remember what it was. So here we go in the very last one, which has all kinds of interesting riffs on it, and it is using handlebar merge to populate a form handler. Let's talk for a minute about the glorious Pardot form handler, one of my favorite features in Pardot. The form handler is just another link, really. It's just a link. If you take a form handler and you fill out all the URL parameters in it and you stick it in your address bar in your browser and hit enter, it's going to fill out the it's going to fill out the form handler just as if you'd submitted it from something on your WordPress site or passed it in whatever other way. The form handler is just another link. So it has all kinds of fanciful uses when you start thinking about it in those terms. So this is one of the examples that I like to use, which is I don't want to collect this information in fields. I just want it to pass through somewhere and do something. I want to maybe put it in the comments box because I want to accumulate it in a field where I'm just going to hold this information, but I don't want to ask 25 questions of somebody and then have to have 25 fields where I don't know when they were filled out. So if I'm doing an event and I want to know what the t-shirt size is, or I want to know if you want a vegan or a gluten-free lunch, instead of forcing people to go to a forum to answer these questions, you can use our custom redirect concept, but instead of using a custom redirect, we use a form handler as the link. So click here for medium shirt, large, or extra large, and then you use the form handler as the URL, and then use the handlebar merge to pre-populate the email address and the comments. Maybe the recipient is attending an event, and that's the name of the event that they're attending. And then we put in, using our URL safe codes, large shirt, and that will pop into the comments field that they're attending this event and they want a large shirt. So again, give them the ability to click something instead of going to another form and filling something out. It fills out the form by way of clicking the form handler as the link. You can also use it as a way to copy information from one field to another if you get them to click it in a link in an email, to concatenate data or to add additional notes. So once again, you can take information from one field or two different fields, combine it together, and put it into a third field, like the comments. Again, I have a client where we've got an email confirmation that when they click the email confirmation, it concatenates a bunch of information that they filled out on the first form and pops it into another form, which puts some information into Salesforce in a format that their team wants to see. So in this case, I'm concatenating into the comments field 3 different custom fields with some additional notes and a whole bunch of other things. Now, again, UTF-8 URL encoding, you can't just stick any old character into a URL. Some characters are reserved. So you got to use this encoding to render things like spaces and colons and commas. And you can also use that %0a to kick a new line in, which does a really nice job of organizing comments inside of Salesforce. So you can actually kick a new line at the end of that comments field, so that they don't run together, which is a super nice way to handle this kind of thing. So that helps to keep your comments field tidy in Salesforce as well. So you can also repeat that riff if you want to use a form handler in the actual, if all you're trying to do is concatenate data, you can actually use JavaScript in the thank you code of a Pardot form to transfer and transform that input data to a form handler and just blind submit it. So you can actually do this all in one step if that's your preference. So you're actually pulling that information that they've put into this entered into the form, and you're grabbing it with the JavaScript, plugging it into the form handler, and sending it on its way as part of the same submit process. And where did this all come from? You know, where did this all come from? And it's this really old thing that's been in Pardot forever, and it's this PI list email parameter, which is Pardot had put this in, and it's really genius, frankly, and from a long time ago. And it was originally intended as a way to get email from some other system to come into Pardot automatically. So you can, if your page is if you got a tracked landing page and you want to send someone from another system into Pardot automatically. Now it only works with email, that's all. But if you put this PI list email parameter equals and then an email address, when they get to that landing page in your tracked website, it will add that email address to Pardot. So using a form handler in the same way as this gives you now an expanded ability to bring information into Pardot from another system that's beyond just the straight up email. So this methodology will cookie the prospect, and when you're sending it from another system, but again, you only get the email address. So if you want to send some information, if you want to send them over from MailChimp, there's the email format there's the email substitution for this for that. There's it for ActiveCampaign. There's it for SendGrid. SendGrid's marketing system. I know all of those work. I've used them to do it. But there are others out there that will do the same thing. But what's interesting about this concept of just sending in the email address is, again, you can use a form handler to do this exact same thing, but you can send more than just the email address. You can send all kinds of information out of that third-party system and straight into Pardot if they click something in the third-party system or the third-party email. So final thoughts. You can't do nested if statements. I've already pointed this out to Salesforce. Hopefully they take the hint. There's also quite a bit of thought going on at Salesforce with respect to expanding the number of fields types and field objects and types of things that we can use as merge fields. I spoke to the product development group a few months ago and gave them some thoughts on what would be the use cases for adding more types of fields from other objects, and what how would that work? One of my big wish lists is getting custom fields from the user from the user record in Salesforce into Pardot as custom fields, because that would have some significant benefits with respect to some of this stuff in terms of trying to customize signatures and customize other actions based on who the owner is of the record. So they are looking at that, and I think this whole product development for Handlebar also has to do with how they're streamlining things with respect to the new email builder in Salesforce, and bringing more and more of the Pardot product on platform. As with everything I ever say, never take my word for it. Test everything you try. Make sure you test it in every possible way, else unintended consequences will result. You have been warned. There's always something that you haven't thought of, or that I haven't thought of, or that I haven't tested. And so caveat emptor, be careful when you're trying this stuff, but do experiment. It's lots of fun. And I love especially for this, I love to do the testing of within the email builder where it lets you view it as a prospect, because that'll really show you whether, what the behavior is when things are flipping on and off according to whether or not that person's prospect has the value in their profile or not. And it does work. It will dynamically show that logic on the basis of whether or not that person has that field value or not. So just remember, handlebars are just a sideways bow tie. That's all for me, but I'm sure there are probably questions. So Laura, I don't know how we
have a couple.
How we do that.
We have a couple questions. I see Jen has asked, have you run into issues where spam checkers are clicking? So your form handler links that you put into your emails, spam filters.
Yep.
Have spam filters clicked those?
Yep. I've not run into it, but I'm sure it can happen. So yeah, that's again a test with a small subset and see what happens. I mean, some kinds of companies may not be able to use all this kind of stuff because you've got a customer base with aggressive anti-spam stuff going on. So have I seen it? No. Do I believe it could happen? Yes. How do you deal with it? Good question.
Yeah. Pardot is getting more aggressive with their spam filters, but they'll never be perfect because as fast as developers can jump at them, the spam companies get faster and faster.
Exactly.
So yeah, so that is a danger if you choose to do that. But if you're, sending this sort of thing like an event and you're asking their meal or something like that, the risk you run is that it's going to put something into your comments field with that sort of scenario. So I like that. That seems like a calculated risk to me.
Yep. Again, sometimes you have to test these things out at a small scale to see how they work in the wild, right? The one thing I like to say is that you will never be able to predict how your customers will. You can try and predict how your customers behave, but they'll always surprise you with something you hadn't thought of, and they'll never do exactly what you want them to do. That's just natural.
So next question from Michelle Chang. We sometimes need to address elected officials versus normal people. So with an elected official, they should be addressed as mayor last name versus their first name. Do you have recommendations on how best to set that up?
So I'm sure that you have the ability to put a basically what you would call an honorarium in your. I'm sure essentially it's either a custom field you're collecting or you're holding it in Salesforce in some way. I mean, there is a field for that where it's Mr., Mrs., Mr., Mrs., or you could redeploy it as. You can add values to that, so it could be whatever you want.
The salutation field in Pardot.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So if you added that to the salutation field, you can certainly sync the salutation field and use that. If there were a value there, it would show it. So
the statement would be like, if salutation, and then it's checking is salutation not blank, and you would say,
right.
if salutation, say salutation last name, the else would
Yep.
be hello first name.
First name. Yeah, and that would do it. That would do it. I mean, it's all a question of how clean your data is,
Yeah.
right? You know, make sure make sure that field is like has values in it that so you can't get the salesperson to put a question mark in there. I love that one. Or SP question mark.
Right.
I love that one too. So this is the world we live in.
Yeah.
Trying to keep clean data when salespeople keep giving you data that's bad.
So that's a good point too, that if you're addressing a list, it would be any value in the salutation field. So it would be Mrs., Mr., Doctor, all of that. If that's cool with you, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're specifically only wanting to do it for elected officials, then yeah, a special field called like an honorarium would be a good one.
Right. Yeah.
Good one. Okay.
James. Awesome.
James is asking, any solution to getting dynamic content to load inside of an HML if-else statement?
Well, I would think, now I have not tried it, but I would think dynamic content would load in there according to the dynamic contents condition, as long as the HML statement was valid.
Mm-hmm.
So you use something else to control whether or not that dynamic content was showing, and then the dynamic content itself would be driven by whatever controls the dynamic content. So it's a great question. I've not tried it. I'm not sure what the use case is, but I'm sure if I thought about it a while, I could come up with one. But I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work.
I could see it as like, if I wanted to send different content to people in different countries, I would create a piece of dynamic content with like, if country is United States, then do this. If country is Canada, then do this.
Right.
That to me is.
If you didn't know the country, then don't show any country related stuff.
And that's just straightforward dynamic content. Right. And I've definitely done that. And there is limits to dynamic content, of course.
Right. 25.
And then, so you said it's a limit of 10 dynamic content inside emails now, right?
That is I pulled that off of a Salesforce knowledge base article. So that's what they say.
And that's a bummer, because if that's true, and I haven't tested it, but in a previous life, I worked at a place where I had like 25 different pieces of dynamic content in one email, and it just sort of layered one after the other. And it was many, many years before HML was released. So I don't know the status of that email template, if it works or not.
Yeah. But of course you do, now we do have this option. In some cases, you might be able to use it instead of the dynamic content,
right.
Depending on what the dynamic content's purpose was.
Yeah. James, totally happy to troubleshoot some things on that if you have some examples you want to put in the Kardashian Slack channel or anything like that. We're happy to jump in on that. Okay.
So this is a good one.
Yes.
For resubscribes in different languages, can't we use dynamic content in an email template that uses prospect's country field as a variation and display content in country-specific language? Yes, you can. What won't happen is when they get to the resubscribe page is generally in the resubscribe. There's no variations of the resubscribe page. So that's going to end up being in English regardless. The message that you get if you're using the basic resubscribe on a Pardot form, that message is in English. And I think I looked at the CSS on it, and I'm not even sure you can even get at it to touch the CSS in any meaningful way. You can maybe change the color of it, and that's about it.
Yeah.
You could display some content in a country-specific language, yes, but the resubscribe link is one and one only, and it's going to go to that page that's basically in English, and no HML allowed there, and no dynamic content allowed there. So, it's not the nicest solution, and I think, again, we still struggle with the notion of trying to market in multiple languages when these tools just weren't originally conceived to accommodate that.
Yes.
And I haven't seen one yet that does a good job of it.
Yeah, there are varying degrees of how well and
Yeah.
how badly they do it. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
multilingual is better supported on your own website by, for example, I use multilingual with a Drupal website and even WordPress to some extent. It's much more baked into the more robust, CMS tools like Drupal and WordPress than, unfortunately, Pardot.
And that's often why people will use form handlers, is because they want to render the form in multiple languages, but they'll accept one form input in the one form input regardless of the language.
Right.
They'll just want to use one handler. So if you're and I was doing this too. I mean, a few years back when we were running 18 languages on our website. Well, we didn't want to create 18 different Pardot forms for the same form. So we used form handlers, even with all of their drawbacks.
Yeah. So the way those work, if anyone's not familiar with, a website in multilingual, basically your website, you create the form on your website, and then the website has a table of translations. And if they're on the French version of the page, they show the French word for first name, prénom,
right,
et cetera, et cetera. And so it's kind of loaded and baked into the website system entirely. It does make handling unsubscribes and that sort of thing harder when you have a tool like Pardot, because Pardot, of course, when you send emails, you need to include an unsubscribe link or an email preference center. And that's when you start getting fancy with needing to provide multiple languages on a single, email preference center.
Right.
And I certainly didn't achieve, nirvana there, because I would have, for example, a French email template and have them pointing to a French email preference center and a German email template and a German email preference center. But if they got on the English list, it wouldn't dynamically change them back and forth. So the best I could do was, create links from one to another. If you're on the English page and you want to see the French one, click the little French flag.
Yep, exactly. And I suppose you could render that with dynamic content, in the footer. And the challenge with all of this is determining which language your prospect really wants, right? We shouldn't we can't make an assumption that just because somebody's in Germany that they actually wanted your content in German. We can't assume. Yeah, there's it could be. Well, I could be over there asking for content, because I can be working over there. So one way that's typical that people would think about it is what if the browser language is if the browser language is a better signal than whatever language they happen to fill out on your website, maybe that's what you should go by. Or there's different ways to think about it, but in general, what you don't want to make it so rigid that that your prospect has no way of somehow getting themselves back to no, I really want the content in Spanish, not Swedish. So
a language picker of some sort, like a drop down on your page or something like that.
A language picker, or again, even how do I get if I get to the preference center, how do I if I've filled up something on the different preference centers, what happens? I mean, it's frankly, it's a nightmare, but you have to deal with it, because if you're going to deliver content in multiple languages, you have to be able to adapt to the fact that people are, again, not going to do what you want them to do. Or you're going to somehow get roped into the wrong language for some reason because you went to the wrong page.
For sure. Well, we could definitely go down a rabbit hole of multilingual for many hours. Thanks, Sumit.
Yes, sure.
That's definitely a fun one. Final call for questions in the chat. And in the meantime, I am going to drop into the chat the link for that first-party tracking user group meeting with the Twin Cities and New Delhi user group meeting. It happens next week. It's about, you know, the first-party tracking cookie. What do you need to know? What do you need to do now in Pardot? And it's a really valuable one that I think should be top of mind, especially since Chrome is, you know, making all these changes. Google Chrome as your browser is making all these changes. That's going to later this year cut off everybody with their tracking cookies, their third-party tracking cookies. So
Yep.
Pardot has released a first-party tracking cookie. It's out of beta. You know, anyway, attend the meeting. It should be a great session.
Yeah, and it seems to be working. I've got a couple places using it. But yeah, it is that's right. It's out of beta, so it's now time to get real about it. I'm this came up a year ago, really. This whole phasing out of the third-party cookies. I think it's dragged on much longer than they had originally anticipated it might. But yeah, we've got to prepare for a post third-party cookie world.
Yes. And one more thing, I just realized that I mentioned the Pardashian Slack channel, which is not a Salesforce sponsored event of any sort. It is a private Slack channel. I'm going to put the link in the chat. It's a Google form. Sarah McNamara is an individual person who runs the Slack channel. It is free to join, but she wants you to agree to terms and conditions and code of conduct type stuff before you join. So please feel free to join us all on the Pardashian Slack channel.
Yep, it's a great place to hang out.
All right, I haven't seen any more questions come in, but thanks so much, Bill, for joining us. We really, really enjoyed, all of our minds are churning, I'm sure, with how can we replace our old school Pardot merge language with Handlebar merge language things.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm glad to have been here. And if anyone has any other questions, I'm on the Slack channel. The Slack channel is always open because I use Slack for some of my other area businesses. So yeah, just feel free to drop a question in Slack if you join the.
What's your website address? Unfetteredmarketing.com.
Unfetteredmarketing.com. That's right. And there's a blog there with some. There's a blog there that I occasionally will post articles on Pardot related.
And Bill's not so big on Twitter, but you can find him on LinkedIn too. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you very much.